Let's talk about
politics, environmental science,
global warming,
constitutional rights,
social and economic challenges,
money, power, choice.
Nature does not compromise.
Extreme droughts, extreme heat waves.
Sea levels are rising, and it is
about climate change.
This is the future of the next generations.
Welcome everyone to the second event of our series of the Farm Bill events. This one is From Fields to Policy, Farm Bill, and Food Justice. I'm joined today with Tony Pasno, my co-host with Change the Chamber. So Change the Chamber is a nonpartisan coalition of over 100 plus student groups across the country. With our campaigns, we educate for science-based climate action within the chambers of commerce, trade associations, corporations, government agencies, and local communities. We are also one of the members of Climate Action Campaign, who has helped us make this event possible. So thank you to Climate Action Campaign and to Climate Week NYC for this opportunity. We're very excited to have you all here today. And very excited to learn more. Thank you to everyone who joined us last night, especially. We had a great conversation last night, so we're really excited to continue that today. We learned yesterday about the Farm Bill and how it impacts just day-to-day life for a lot of people. And today we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the justice aspect of this bill and how it impacts different community, kind of shifting this conversation into the equity and environmental justice realm. Tony and I are not experts on this, but we have brought together some people that are. So we're really here to learn just as much as the rest of you are. And we're really excited to be active listeners in this. If you have any questions during the presentations, you're welcome to put them in the chat. We will also have some questions at the very end that we have prepared, but if anybody has anything that you think of as we're discussing, definitely feel free to put in the chat. And so today we're going to start with Evie, also from Change the Chamber, giving a little rundown on what the Farm Bill is.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to be introducing the Inflation Reduction Act. We're focusing on this piece of legislation along with the Farm Bill because it had a lot of investments that tie into what the Farm Bill did. And it's also the biggest investment the federal government has made so far in our climate. So I went over this last night. I'll do it briefly again for anyone who wasn't at the session last night, but I'd like to leave as much time as possible for our speakers tonight to share more because they're the experts tonight and that's why they're here. So I'll let them share all the details, but the Inflation Reduction Act provided some additional investments in conservation programs that allow farmers to protect the environment and their farmlands. So previously there were conservation programs in the Farm Bill, but with some of them, up to 3/4 of farmers that applied were turned away due to the lack of funding. And so the Inflation Reduction Act has helped fix that, or at least partially. And then the Inflation Reduction Act also provides an additional around $18 billion in climate smart agriculture that may be adopted in the upcoming Farm Bill. This is currently a major point of contention and negotiation, so we'll see how that ends up. And then there are also additional investments in low-income communities like replacing lead pipes, improving infrastructure, broadband, and home decarbonization in the IRA. And this helps complement the nutrition assistance for low-income individuals and others that is provided by the Farm Bill. And so the Inflation Reduction Act, it's not perfect and it doesn't meet all of our climate goals, but it's a start and it's a major climate win. And we'd like to see more like that. So tonight we'll share some of the successes of both the Inflation Reduction Act and the Farm Bill, along with some other policies that are happening. And we also did that last night, and we'll discuss some opportunities for improvement and further action. And we'll focus on how the IRA has contributed to making the Farm Bill more effective, along with other policies that could contribute to a more sustainable food and agricultural system that uplifts all stakeholders, including farmers, underserved communities, and farm workers. This was a product of compromise, so it doesn't include everything. Both the IRA and the Farm Bill won't include everything that any group of stakeholders would like, but they're both progress, and it's a start to a more sustainable system. And there's also a lot more going on across the US and in many other parts of the world, from local to state and national levels, to help create an equitable future. And this federal legislation is just one part of the puzzle that's needed. So now I'll pass it back to Erica and Tony and our speakers. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Evie. It's a great background to have for this conversation. So we're going to start today with Dr. OMANJANA GOSWAMI. She's an interdisciplinary scientist with the Food and Environmental Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. She conducts research on the practices and policies of the current U.S. agricultural model, anthropogenic contaminants, nutrient cycles, and negative impact on natural resources and human health. Through her research, she advocates for implementable policy implications that create equitable and regenerative agricultural systems. Before joining UCS, Dr. Goswami was a staff scientist at the Center for Food Safety, where she researched the environmental and human health implications of pesticide application in our food systems. While working for former Congressman Tulsi Gabbard, Dr. Goswami worked on policy issues related to environmental protection, marine conservation, coral reef preservation, and contaminants. So now I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Evie, for setting that up. Thank you to everyone who's attending. I am calling in from the west coast of India, where I'm visiting family. I'm usually based in Washington, D.C., so if I fumble and stutter, it's because I'm severely jet-lagged and trying to get used to this wildly different time zone while I still manage work stuff and commitments based on East Coast hours at the U.S. So I wasn't a part of yesterday's session, but I can imagine the conversation as to how it went, setting up the Farm Bill, what it touches, what it covers, and also what it doesn't. But just as a brief overview to set up the rest of my conversation, the Farm Bill is this, massive piece of legislation that often flies under the radar, right? Not a lot of us really on a day-to-day basis talk about the Farm Bill over dinner table conversations. It is well over $1 trillion of money that's pumped into our food and farming system and really touches all aspects of our life, including what's grown in the United States to what ends up as food on our table. This massive piece of legislation, about 75% of the money that's allocated to the Farm Bill is towards food access and nutrition security programs, and that directly controls, who's able to access food and what markets are open to people who are under-resourced and often do not have access to nutritious, clean, or sustainably produced food to put on the table. And while my expertise is not in nutrition access and food security, there are several other titles of the Farm Bill. If you leave aside that big chunk that focuses really on everything, starting from farm safety net programs to conservation programs, which again, like was mentioned, the IRA has pumped about $20 billion with a B into these, with the chance of that being written into the baseline funding of the Farm Bill. And that's majorly at stake because climate investments, this has been the largest climate investment in agriculture in history, and protecting these ensures that, we make agriculture more resilient in the face of changing climate. Other programs within the Farm Bill touch upon food, commodities, specialty crops, rural development, water access, wildfire programs. Really, I can throw out words and it's somewhere within there. It would be in the Farm Bill. It's like I said, it's hard to know that, this massive piece of legislation really touches every aspect of our life. And we know so little about it on a day-to-day basis. Now, farm policy as a whole is influenced by a large extent, right? This bill is written and debated every 5 years in Congress. And right now we're kind of looking at a checkmate type situation as to whether we have a farm bill or not and what that will look like. We are running on an automatic extension of a farm bill that expired essentially last year. And there is talks again of another extension of that. And I'll leave people who work in government affairs to sort of touch more upon that. That really is not my expertise. But the main question then comes, you're looking at well over worth $1 trillion of money in a piece of legislation, but who influences this? Who are the players who are controlling as to what's being written into this, or who's getting the money out of it, and who's profiteering off of this? And to no one's surprise, big agribusiness corporations own a major stake in this and really have an open door policy in Congress and with the agencies and have massive control over not just food and farming system, but also over this piece of legislation that gets written in Congress. So not only have these major agribusiness players, which are often kind of represented through various organizations, various companies, various trade groups, as well as various special interest groups, they've not only hijacked our food and farming system, but time and again, they've put profits ahead of people and environmental health. And we've seen that, recurringly occur. For instance, my team at the Union of Concerned Scientists works a lot on the corporate influence in our food and farming system. And in a recent analysis that we published at the beginning of summer, and I'll drop the link of this report as well as other resources. I was the lead analyst on this, and our deputy director was kind of the main author. And our analysis found that in the last 5 years, since the passage of the last Farm Bill, which was the end of 2018 to up until today, up until the beginning of 2024, well over $523 million, so well over $500 million was spent on lobbying on issues that included the Farm Bill. Now, this data has been accessed through the Lobbying Disclosure Act disclosures made available on the Senate website, and it shows that over 561 organizations. Just gonna pause for a moment. $523 million spent on lobbying by well over 561 organizations in less than 5 years on issues that include the Farm Bill. Now, there are a couple of caveats here, really. The way these reports are filed, we don't really know who's lobbying on what exact issues or how much money is being spent on the particular lobbying issues. These are aggregated reports that are filed every quarter. So while we aren't, the data isn't granular enough for us to know what exact issues are being lobbied on, but we do know that really in 5 years, agribusiness groups and organizations are spending well over $500 million. And that money is more than the money that is being spent, at least in the last 2 years, on oil and gas lobbying. So I'll just take a pause there. We've essentially grown up knowing that oil and gas has the largest lobby in Congress, right? That isn't true anymore. Agribusiness has the largest lobby in Congress. And I'll let that sink in for a moment, because you don't realize then kind of the massive corporate influence that is on this piece of legislation. And we found that lobbying really ramped up in the last year or so. Well over half of what was spent in lobbying, so well over essentially $250 million was spent in the last fiscal year in the lead up to the Farm Bill. We expected a Farm Bill to happen in 2024, and that didn't. And the majority of the spending was in the year leading up to it, which essentially means that people know what they want and people know when to act, and that is to act in the years leading up to the passage of the next farm bill and essentially when it's been written. And to no one's surprise, the highest spender when it comes to lobbying is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. In our list, we found that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has spent, I think, in the vicinity of, if I'm correct, $61 million or so. I'll drop the link of the PDF here that lists aggregated lobbying expenditure and business and trade groups, which the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a part of, is actually the most spender when it comes to lobbying dollars. And they've spent as much as $168 million in the 5 years since the passage of the last Farm Bill to when this analysis was performed early in 2024, and is followed by, other players like agribusiness, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing. We also do include nonprofit and advocacy groups as a part of it, just to make sure that our data is as transparent as possible. And there's fuel and energy, education, transport, the Farm Bureau, both state as well as federal chapter of the Farm Bureau, all are major players when it comes to lobbying the Farm Bill. And like I said, when it comes to who these top entities are, we're looking at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We're looking at the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, Bayer, Merck, American Chemistry Council, commodity producers like the American Crystal Sugar Company. So basically, that means that farmers who are directly impacted by this piece of legislation are the least represented in many ways when it comes to the Farm Bill. So I think I've kind of hit my time. So I'm going to pause there and I'm going to drop the link to the report. But I'd also like to point out that now that we found out that this kind of piece of legislation is so skewed towards corporate interests, it means that farmers and farm workers especially have no representation in particular in the Farm Bill. There are no sort of clauses when it comes to farm worker protections in the Farm Bill. And I know there are several marker bills floating around in Congress today that, if included in the current package, would essentially ensure that farm workers receive protections that they're due because they're such a massive part of the food farming system and essentially responsible for putting food on our plate. I'll stop there and I'll pass on to the next speaker. I'm sorry for going overboard, and I'll take questions at the end.
You did not go overboard like at all. You're perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. I think it's really great kind of building on the conversation that we had last night. And I love the perspective that you bring in this, because as a group, we think about the Chamber of Commerce and their influence in over shaping climate policy, right? And so to think about the chamber and the way that they influence different pieces of legislation is really interesting. And I think it adds to our conversation. I think you make some really great points around different groups whose interests are not served in the Farm Bill. That was some of what we talked a little bit about last night. And I know what one of our speakers is going to be talking about a little bit later. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Jeff Horsfield, from the Environmental Working Group, works on policies to make food more sustainable and healthier, including those touching on alternative proteins like plant-based meat. Prior to joining the Environmental Working Group, he worked in government affairs at the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and he interned in the office of Senator Cory Booker. Horsfield also served in the AmeriCorps with the AIDS United in Durham, North Carolina, and is a volunteer coordinator for Carolina Tiger Rescue. He holds a bachelor's degree from Gettysburg College and a master's degree in public policy from the College of William and Mary. Jeff, thank you so much for being here. And without further ado, I will pass it over to you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I love to see interest in the Farm Bill. As somebody who's worked on this Farm Bill and the last one, I'm a bit of a Farm Bill nerd. So I love to see folks engaged. I it was true for this Congress, and it's going to be true probably for the next Congress too. But we only have so many opportunities to work on meaningful climate change legislation. And the Farm Bill really represents the best opportunity that we have to work on climate change. So I'm so glad to see folks willing to engage and learn about this issue. And you've now done, some of you, 1 1/3 of a webinar. And that means you know 99% more about the Farm Bill than, more than 99% of DC when it comes to the Farm Bill. So consider yourselves experts already. I also love that we've been talking about, not just climate change, but also like the ideas around, money and influence. And what I want to touch on a little bit is what are kind of some of those policies or issues that are really at play kind of in this current Farm Bill. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and go ahead and change the view. All right. Can I get a thumbs up that people can see my screen? Great. Can you see just the presentation, or does it say, do you see everything?
We see everything right now.
You see everything? Okay. Let me try to fix that. This is better?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay. So some of our at Environmental Working Group, I think many folks know us through our work on the Farm Bill. We have some great resources out there, including things like our subsidies database, which is farm.ewg.org, as well as our conservation database, which is conservation.ewg.org. And it's a great way of tracking where is the money going that is in the Farm Bill, right? Where are subsidies flowing? Whether it's on a county basis, where are conservation dollars going, right, within EQIP or some of these other major climate change tools that are in the Inflation Reduction Act. And I put an X here because nobody really knows when the Farm Bill is going to get done. Maybe in December, maybe next year. Maybe they'll do, which they've discussed, a 2-year extension of the current Farm Bill, and that'll put us into, who knows where. But what I want to talk about is really particularly the commodity subsidies to start. So most of the money that is in the Farm Bill is flowing to only a handful of producers. So the largest, the richest, the wealthiest farmers in just a handful of states receive most of the money that is in particularly Title I, as well as the other titles that have to do with crop insurance. So you've probably heard the term like reference prices. So this is essentially guaranteed sources of income for certain producers. So, EWG has done a bunch of work showing that an increase in reference prices, for example, would only benefit about 6,000 farmers. And what I want to frame this as is when people talk about the Farm Bill or when people talk about other issues like hunger and, they talk about all of the spending, we don't really talk about the wasteful spending in some of these other titles in the Farm Bill, particularly through subsidies, where many of these funds are going to the largest and wealthiest farmers who have to grow the right things. So notice on this list in particular, the biggest benefits, right, are corn and soy. The U.S. is a net importer of food. We export primarily animal feed, and we import what are called specialty crops, which don't really get many of these subsidies. So specialty crops is a fancy way of saying fruits and vegetables, the things that USDA is telling you to eat. We don't really spend many of these subsidies on those programs. So I want to also just frame here how these costs and these premiums have increased over time. This relates to crop insurance. Crop insurance doesn't really work like car or home insurance. The way it works is essentially guarantees certain income levels for producers. Again, you have to really grow the right things to be eligible for these and have a certain amount. So these costs have skyrocketed over the last 7-8 years in particular. You can see kind of the impact of the 2018 Farm Bill on this chart. And again, it's $10 billion over the last 10 years. $100 billion over the last 10 years, and it'll be another $120 billion over the next 10 years. So it's one of the largest funds within USDA and within the federal government, and it's mostly going to the largest farmers. And this is all during the backdrop of farm income increasing. So again, here's just another breakdown of crop insurance. You can see the top 1%, the richest 1% of recipients receive 26% of all the payments. If we go down to the top 10% of the richest recipients, they get almost 80% of all of the subsidy payments. So all this money is primarily being aggregated by the largest and richest farms and agribusinesses. And again, this is all in the backdrop of farm income is increasing. This data here goes up to 2021. It has kind of cooled off slightly in the last 2 years. You might see some news reports showing farm income is down in 2023. And that's true, but it's still higher than it was in 2020. So we're still at historical highs when it comes to, net farm income. But again, that wealth is primarily concentrated with folks who grow the right things. If you want to learn more about all of these resources, I'll put some links in the chat after I'm done. But, again, really highlights things like we call it our City Slickers report. So folks who live in the 50 most densely populated urban areas who receive government subsidies for farms. So we know that their primary address is, say, Washington, D.C. or Miami or San Francisco, but they're getting money because they are loosely engaged in a farm business. So again, this is a great example of taxpayers really subsidizing some of the richest and wealthiest folks. And this is all happening, again, while the climate is getting worse. So this slide shows USDA conservation spending in one of the programs called EQIP. Can I get a raise of hands if you've heard of EQIP before? Great. So we mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. One of the things that the IRA funded was EQIP, or the Environmental Qualities Incentives Program. The way this program works is it pays farmers to adopt certain conservation practices, or pays them a cost share of those practices. So say if you want to do cover crops, you can submit an application to the USDA and they'll fund a portion of that. Now they fund all types of conservation practices, some that are, according to USDA, climate smart, others that are not climate smart, and others that you can call climate dumb because they actually increase emissions. So 5% of what USDA funded in EQIP actually increased emissions prior to the Inflation Reduction Act. And again, the demand for these conservation programs is unmet. You can see that the number of farmers who are submitting applications in these conservation programs is growing. And by the time the Inflation Reduction Act passed in 2022, that was just over 40% were getting funded. And again, that number has actually only stayed flat because one thing we didn't anticipate in these conservation programs is the increased demand for some of these conservation programs. USDA data shows that, for example, one of the conservation programs is called RCPP, which funds groups of farmers to adopt conservation practices that go over kind of boundary and property lines. That program had an additional $250 million in funding from the Inflation Reduction Act and received about $2 billion worth of requests. So demand, once these programs got additional funding, demand really blew up. And in particular in these states. So this is a list of states where farmers will receive less federal funding if Congress were to divert the Inflation Reduction Act into price guarantees for certain farmers. And that's one of the things that in particularly big businesses like the Farm Bureau have been advocating for is don't put money into conservation programs, just put it into guaranteed income programs. So many states will lose billions of dollars if this were to be the case, including the country's largest agriculture state, which is California. Again, ironically, this is all happening as climate change is making these programs cost more. So rather than treating some of the symptoms, like providing additional climate smart funding for climate smart practices, what we're doing is we are, treating the cause, we're treating the symptoms. So we're increasing crop insurance or increasing disaster payments. Meanwhile, all of these things are just making it worse. And that's because, again, you've probably seen something like this before. Agriculture is about 11% of US emissions. That number went down slightly this last year, but that's mostly because fertilizer costs really increased. So farmers were using less fertilizer. So that number here is 11%. Now it's about 10%. But if the US were to, say, cut emissions from transportation, from industry, from power, all the things that a number of organizations have been working on and climate change advocates have been working on, if we were to hit those goals, we would see agriculture go to this, which is 32% of US emissions. So by 2050, agriculture could be the leading source of US emissions in this country as we lower emissions from transportation and the power sector, but US ag emissions end up staying flat. And nobody wants to be number one, right? We don't want farmers to be the number one source of greenhouse gas emissions in this country. And the Farm Bill and protecting the Inflation Reduction Act climate smart guardrails is really key to making that happen.
And Jeff, just
go
want to
ahead.
let you know you're about at 10 minutes. So if there's a few closing thoughts, just so we can have some space for our next speaker.
Sure. The only other thing I want to mention is this idea of pesticide preemption. So this other priority for particularly big businesses, besides attacking the Inflation Reduction Act, is preempting state and local pesticide laws. Many state and local governments have these standards, and this relates, and I'll put this last slide there, essentially big businesses like Bayer and CropLife are trying to limit their liability in court cases where things like glyphosate or paraquat are being connected to Parkinson's disease or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So this is an effort at attacking state and local laws, and particularly attacking workers who are most at risk when it comes to pesticides.
Thank you so much for sharing. And, it was one of the things we talked about last night is the Farm Bill. They call it an omnibus bill. And so it's like a huge piece of legislation that includes a lot of other bills, kind of over the years. And so we could talk for a while about this because there's a lot of things. And, I think what you said in the beginning, Jeff, is that not a lot of people have a lot of awareness about this. But it is something that, regardless if you have awareness, it impacts you. And so I think that that's incredibly fascinating. And I want to actually transition to our next speaker, who couldn't unfortunately join us this evening, but was able to send us a video. She got pulled into a high-level meeting in DC related to the Farm Bill, actually. So we thought that, more power to you. VANESSA Garcia Polanco co-designs the strategy and implementation of the National Young Farmers Coalition government relations campaigns. What she does, she serves as the organizational council member of the U.S. National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. She has previously worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems, where she is an alumni of Michigan State University and as well as the University of Rhode Island. She is a James Beard Foundation Scholar, an Agriculture, Food, and Humans Values Society Innovation Leader, and a 2023 GRIST Fixer. As an Afro-Dominican immigrant, she brings her experiences and identities to her policy and advocacy activities. She leads a Dominican food studies project and funnels financial and agricultural resources to help support Dominican food sovereignty projects. And so without further ado, I think Evie's going to pull up the video.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vanessa Garcia Polanco with National Young Farmers Coalition, and I'm also a member of the National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition, and I send you greetings from Washington, D.C., where unfortunately I cannot join you on the session today because we have a continuing resolution probably being voted on today, and many other high-level agricultural events as we're in the middle of Farm Bill negotiations here in D.C. So I would like to tell you more about Young Farmers. Young Farmers as an organization, we believe that young farmers, especially the ones that have been mostly disproportionately affected by agricultural policy in the past, if we resource and train, they have the power to change federal policy. And we have been doing that for the past 14 years as an organization because we believe that policy, and especially the best vehicle for agricultural policy, that is the Farm Bill, is our best available path to create sustainable changes to our food and agricultural system that invest in the next generation of farmers and also equip farmers to be the climate leaders that they are. Based on our research, we know that the next generation of farmers are eager to fight climate change. They don't need to be convinced that climate change is a problem. They're really in the forefront of being impacted and acting upon doing climate action on their farms, leading with conservation practices. But because the ecosystem that we have created over the 100 years of farm policy through the Farm Bill was not really designed for this generation of farmers and the way they farm to be sustained by the Farm Bill. When we look at the history of the Farm Bill, we have been mostly focused on commodity crops, which is a really narrow list that most of my farmers do not grow. My farmers are growing mostly food and direct market sales, farmers markets, directly to schools, directly to hospitals, directly to restaurants, and directly to our communities through community supported agriculture and many other ways. So when we think about what is possible in the Farm Bill, almost everything is possible to change our food system through the Farm Bill. But especially when it comes to climate and climate action and conservation practices, we need more resources invested towards reorienting the food system in the way that serves the next generation of farmers, in the way that the next generation of farmers wants to farm, and that is with sustainable practices, organic, with the most conservation practices and services in a way that is culturally competent, using traditional ecological knowledge, agroecology, and many other practices that we do not still have enough resources allocated to us in the Farm Bill or allocated to us just in the title of the Farm Bill allocated to conservation services. At the same time, young farmers, historically, we needed a foundation related to education and support to build a pipeline of young farmers. And we had done that historically through many years. We were able to create the Beginning Farmer Rancher program that's raised the next generation of farmers, and the 2501 program that especially trains and supports farmers of color, veteran farmers, and women farmers. But right now, all those resources are really focused on education. We need to make sure that we're able to put farmers on the land. And that's what, mostly as a coalition, we're focused on land access, credit access, and access to conservation programs, because we see those as the biggest trifecta, that if your farmers have resources, they can be in the land implementing conservation practices to fight climate change. At the same time, we know that we're fighting against big corporations, big farms. As we know, farms are only getting bigger in the United States, and we have lost over 200,000 farms from the last census to the newest one released this year. At the same time, young farmers' numbers are up, but we are fighting against really big things, corporations, foreign land ownership, corporate land ownership, and just a lot of farmers who are non-farm actors, that's what we call them, who are getting Title I payments, and that's commodity payments. So at the same time, we have to remember the history of the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill was born in a time of dire environmental crisis. And we had to think about, the Farm Bill that we are trying to pass right now, this year especially, is it a Farm Bill that is serving the current climate and environmental crisis, the consolidation of food and agricultural system, and the need for young farmers for land and market access, and many other things that we hold dear across the food system? And obviously, I will say no. Or I will say one proposal at least attempts to redefine and challenge what is possible in a Farm Bill. How do we actually deliver a Farm Bill that gets us closer to food justice and climate mitigation and more resources for conservation practices for farmers? And we have another Farm Bill proposal that was passed by the House Agricultural Committee that actually give us more status quo and continuous investing in a way that we do not think are the right investments on Title I programs that doesn't really support what we need for climate action, for the next generation of farmers, and for the many interventions we need across our food system to be more resilient. So my invitation to all of you, as we are thinking about food justice and climate justice, we cannot forget that the Farm Bill can be a vehicle for that. So we are call all of you to really get involved on the Farm Bill action, as we may see a Farm Bill proposal and further negotiations really soon, later this year. At the same time, we really want to make sure that we are not rushing our members of Congress to pass a bad Farm Bill. What is beautiful about the Farm Bill is that it is a reauthorization process. And yes, we have gotten really lazy just doing the same thing, business as usual every year. But if we do it slowly and we do it right, and we focus on farmers and food systems in our rural communities in equity, we can get a Farm Bill that actually addresses the challenges that we have in the 21st century. So my invitation to all of you is to get involved on this Farm Bill process and see it as a vehicle for climate justice, for food justice, and for larger equity in our farming, food, and agricultural communities and in society as a whole. So I let you with my amazing fellow speakers who are dear colleagues, and I hope you ask great questions today. And thank you for joining us, and thank you for your interest on how we can use the Farm Bill as a vehicle for food justice and climate justice. Again, please check out National Young Farmers Coalition. Sign on for all action alerts, sign up for our newsletter. We actually have a speaker talking on Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, tomorrow. So please tap into that and just get involved in organizing, because there is no time to lose to change our food system for the better, because food systems and farmers are part of the solution to the climate crisis. So thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Awesome. So that brings us to our last speaker. Rhonda Thompson is the director of the Nehemiah Center for the First Baptist Church of Montgomery, Alabama. With over 30 years of social work experience, including 15 years in child protective services, she founded the Nehemiah Center in 2021 to address the needs of underserved communities, predominantly the Latino population in the area. Under her leadership, the center offers essential programs such as after-school tutoring, adult education, and initiatives to combat food insecurity, including free meals for children. Rhonda is dedicated to fostering relationships and understanding among diverse cultures, empowering families in the Chisholm community. And as recognized as a community hero, her work reflects a deep commitment to creating a sense of belonging and meeting the vital needs of those she serves. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Rhonda.
Okay, here now?
Yes, you're good.
Okay,
now.
Great. Okay. All right. So I appreciate what these other presenters have said already, and they've really given the nuts and bolts about the policy issues. So I was kind of asked to let you know how some changes in this Farm Bill as it relates to the SNAP program will directly affect particularly my folks here in Montgomery. So let me just tell you a little bit about Montgomery. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but Montgomery is considered the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement. In fact, the first Confederate White House is in Montgomery, and Jefferson Davis took his oath of office on the balcony of the state capitol, which is in the shadow of Dexter Memorial Baptist Church, where, of course, Dr. King was the pastor, and it was the epicenter of the planning and execution of some of the most consequential events of the Civil Rights Movement. We're about 170 miles from the Gulf of Mexico and the Mobile Bay, which during the days of slavery, the slave ships would come straight from the Caribbean, straight to the Gulf of Mexico, to Mobile Bay. They were transferred to steamboats that were then taken up the Alabama River straight to Montgomery. And the enslaved folks were literally taken off the ships, taken through a tunnel that still exists today to the slave blocks where the enslaved people were sold, which is also on the same corner of the Rosa Memorial that we have. It's the same spot that she refused to get us when she was Act 2, which catapulted Montgomery bus boycott, which then put into action some of our major desegregation activities. So let's see,
Rhonda, one thing that might help is if you just turn your video off. We can still hear you okay, though.
Okay.
Yeah, you're okay now.
Okay. Sorry about that. We're kind of got a tropical storm, the parts of a tropical storm coming through right now, so maybe it's caused some issues. I apologize. But anyway, in fact, some of the enslaved people were actually housed in what is now the Equal Justice Initiative and Legacy Museum, if you've heard of that. It was started by Brian Stevens, who has won the release of over 140 wrongfully accused prisoners on death row, most of them Black. And of course, now it's a destination for people from all over the world to come and learn about the civil rights movement. So it's clear that Montgomery has been greatly impacted by its history, and we still are today. And in fact, the Montgomery bus cut that I mentioned some 70 years ago was really was one of the key parts of the civil rights movement. So you might ask, what does that have to do with anything that we're talking about today? But I feel like there's a direct correlation because, of course, when they said, okay, we'll do segregation, no longer segregate the buses, then what they did was they said, if that's what you want us to do, then we're going to drastically defund the bus system, and we're going to cut out services, we're going to cut out bus routes, and then that was particularly consequential as it relates to food justice, because that was at the same time there was white flight into the suburbs area, which meant that downtown, where people mostly relied on transit, on public transit, they were left without grocery stores. They were left without transportation to grocery stores. And as a result of that, on and off for the 20 years that I have been in this area of North Montgomery, we've been in and out of being considered a food desert for the folks, even though we're just miles from the state capitol. And another example of, I think, how that's directly affected, our history has directly affected us, is that with this COVID extension that we had for the SNAP program, our governor, Kay Ivey, along with our state legislature, decided not to accept the extensions from the food program, the COVID relief program. And the reason that they gave for doing that, the only reason that they said publicly about this is that, quote, we don't want people to become dependent on our help. And if we give people too much, then they won't work for themselves. So once again, reckoning back to the days of the plantation owners who would give their enslaved people just enough food to stay alive, but then would require them to they let them use individual plots that they could grow their own food, so that they could be strong enough to actually work on the plantations that they had. So my point is that food has always been used as a weapon and a form of control for people living in poverty. And I will say that in Alabama, we have 761,000 residents, or 10% of our state population, that receive SNAP benefits, which is the supplemental nutrition program that we have, and aid program. And 1 out of every 7 of our residents in Alabama receives these SNAP benefits. 71% of those families are families that have children, and 38% of them are older or disabled family members. And this is a key thing that I think is really important. 37% of all these families are working families. So we're really talking about the working poor that are gaining these benefits. So it's really about, in Alabama, it's really about the national average for folks receiving SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. In Alabama, 10% of all children live below the poverty line, and 11.4% of older adults live underneath the poverty line. So in the years between 2014 and 2018, the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, lifted 144,000 people above the poverty line in Alabama. So that's a pretty significant impact that the SNAP program has. Of course, it is a federal program for low-income families, and it is designed to lift people out of poverty, because the idea is that if they're spending less money on food and they give them the food for the family, then that leaves them with more money to pay for bills and to for the rent and to pay for the other needs that they have. So it's a huge benefit for all of our families that receive that. Also, another big advantage to the SNAP program is that it really streamlines the process for which that people can receive other services. So if you qualify for SNAP, you're also qualify for programs like WIC, free lunch program, things like that. In Montgomery, every student in public school receives free lunches and breakfast. So they receive 2 free meals a day, 5 days a week. And then they also, we had the SNAP, the program, the child nutrition program that helps provide food during the summers for low-income children as well. So, and this qualifies by their income, and then how many meals that they miss each day, and how many meals and what size or reductions in meals that they have. So we're really talking about literally the food that gets in the mouths of our children. One of the other big advantages of the SNAP program and the way that it's distributed to folks is that it's kind of a one-stop, like I said, a one-stop, but it also makes it quicker and easier for changes to be made. So, for instance, when they received more COVID money back during COVID, then they were quickly able to distribute this money. And of course, they have the EBT card, which is the electronic card that they can use that the money goes on, that they can use in the grocery stores and the places that they shop. Also, I think important to know is that for every $1 that is spent with the SNAP program, it generates $1.50 of income for the state of Alabama. So it's not only a program that helps financially for those that are receiving the benefits, but it also helps our local entrepreneurs, our business owners as well. So that's a really important part of the SNAP program as well. There's so much evidence, there's so much evidence there about how that this program affects children. One of the big things is the children that are involved in the SNAP program do better health-wise. They don't have near as many health issues as children in the same income bracket that don't receive SNAP. Far less children who are born underweight, and also they do better in school. And this improves their reading and math scores because they go to school, they're not hungry, they can actually pay attention in class, which is a biggie. And then we also know that the sooner children are on SNAP and receive SNAP services, the earlier they are, the bigger impact that it has. And throughout their life, as far as their metabolic rates, heart disease, diabetes, and things like that are the key things, health concerns for most of our families, low-income families, particularly around here. Let me just give you an example there again of how this program works, and how it can work fast and swift and make a huge difference. So during the COVID, when we had this shutdown immediately. So when we found out, the day before we found out that the next day things would be shutting down, the city would be shutting down, my first thought is, oh my goodness, we have all these kids that are dependent on 2 meals a day that they get at school. And so now we have parents who are going to have to come up with, we're talking about 50 meals a day. I mean, we've got kids, in a week. So, you've got a family where there's 5 kids in the family. That's 2 meals a day, 10 meals. That's 5 days a week. That's 50 meals that they've got to come up with. At the same time, that there again, most of our families were service workers. So the plants were being shut down. A lot of people in the hospitality industry So at the same time that they're getting no income at all to their homes, then we're then way more meals than they were used to having to provide for their children. So got together with people from the United Way, from Child Nutrition Program, and in Montgomery is with the YMCA is the distributor of that. So we were able to come up with solutions of how we can get this food to these children through the Child Food Program. So any child that qualified for SNAP qualified for the food that we were able to distribute. So what we ended up doing is that I was able to pick up food from the local schools. At first, it was every day. We were picking up over 150 meals and delivering them to 150 children daily. As it went on, we were able to condense it a little bit, so it's twice a week, same amount of meals. So during the whole COVID period, when we were shut down and people were not able to go out, these children were still able to receive a breakfast and a lunch at least 5 days a week. So I think that that's a catastrophic change for these families. Yes.
Rhonda, I just want to we just have a couple of minutes left, so if you have any closing thoughts.
Okay. Well, like I said, for children in Alabama, it's it's really a matter of life and death in some situations, and it's definitely a matter of better education, better health, and better long-term prognosis for families that are in poverty.
Thank you, Rhonda, much for sharing that. I think it's something that we've talked about a little bit over the past 2 days. I mean, the Farm Bill, its biggest funding goes towards SNAP, and so hearing your experience with it and what things are like in your own community, I think is really valuable to the conversation. And I think something that I'm sort of recognizing as I'm hearing all of us talk about this bill is that it impacts all of our lives in different ways. And, when it comes to climate change is interconnected with a lot of other issues. And so, we need to be thinking about where our food comes from, where it goes, and some of the problems within the system. I'm getting emotional because it's something I really am passionate about. And, I think conversations like these are a good step in the right direction. Because when we educate ourselves, we can understand the system and what needs to change and who isn't being thought of in the system. And so I want to really thank our speakers for sharing here today. And I want to actually drive people out to a couple calls to action. We have a couple different things that we're trying to get out right now. I'm going to drop one of them in the chat, or if Evie, you want to drop it in. This one is from Climate Action Campaign called Defend Our Climate petition. And so this is really to try to ensure that some of the climate protections included in the Inflation Reduction Act are not rolled back or weakened. And then also we have a campaign right now. We are trying to get out the vote. We believe that this is a really important thing to do right now, and definitely encourage everyone and anyone to get out and vote. We have a whole campaign where you can get resources on that. That's going to be dropped into the chat. We also have a Farm Bill policy brief that I'm going to share in the chat. And so this is something that one of our fellows created here at Change the Chamber that provides a little bit more information about the Farm Bill, the things that are included within it. And would definitely encourage anyone who is interested to go check it out. Put that one in the chat too. And then last but not least, we encourage you to check us out, Change the Chamber. We're always looking for folks to work with, to collaborate with us. You can find us on LinkedIn. We also have a newsletter too, if you are interested in hearing more from us. But again, we are at 7:02, and I don't want to keep anyone any longer. I wish we could talk about this into the night because it still is so much more to dig in here. But again, thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.